Montana Territory, 1885. The unforgiving summer heat shimmered across the vast plains like a mirage of broken promises. For 24-year-old Jack Jenkins, the frontier had always been a place where men came to escape from the law, from their pasts, from the suffocating expectations of civilized society, and most importantly, from the dangerous vulnerability that came with loving someone. The West had taught Jack one lesson above all others. Attachment was a luxury that got men killed. Better to ride alone, trust no one, and keep moving before the ghosts of yesterday caught up. A man needs nothing but his horse, his gun, and enough sense to keep his mouth shut. His father had told him before dying in a Kansas saloon brawl when Jack was barely 14. 10 years of drifting had only cemented this belief into gospel. As he guided his exhausted chestnut mare across the sun-bleached Montana grasslands, Jack could feel his canteen growing lighter with each passing mile. 3 days since his last proper drink, and the stream he'd been following had run dry miles back. His cracked lips and parched throat reminded him that even the toughest cowboys couldn't outride their own mortality. The distant outline of a modest homestead shimmered on the horizon like salvation itself. "Just water, girl," he whispered to his horse, patting her sweaty neck. "We'll get some water and move on before sundown." That was his way. Take what you need and leave before you owe anything to anyone. Connections were chains, and Jack Jenkins had sworn never to be shackled again. The homestead grew clearer as he approached, a sturdy cabin with a porch, a small corral, and a well-tended garden that somehow defied the harsh Montana summer. Surprising, for a place so isolated. Whoever lived here had determination. He'd give them that much. Jack's mare snorted with anticipation as they neared the property, picking up her pace without prompting. He was about to dismount when the cabin door swung open. The woman who emerged was unlike anyone Jack had encountered in his years of drifting. At 22, Violet Blackburn stood tall and confident on her porch, a rifle held comfortably in her capable hands, not pointed at him, but not entirely at ease either. Her golden blonde hair was pulled back in a practical braid, though errant strands framed a face that combined frontier determination with undeniable beauty. Her blue calico dress, modest but well-fitted, suggested someone who balanced practicality with a refusal to surrender all femininity to the wilderness. "That's far enough, stranger," she called, her voice clear and steady across the yard. "State your business." Jack raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm. "Ma'am, I'm just looking for water. For me and my horse. Been riding 3 days with nothing but dregs." Violet studied him with intelligent blue eyes that seemed to assess not just the truth of his words, but the measure of the man himself. After a long moment, her posture relaxed slightly. "The well's round back," she said, lowering her rifle. "You can water your horse at the trough. There's a dipper for yourself." Relief washed over Jack. "Much obliged, ma'am." He led his mare around to the well, feeling the woman's watchful gaze on his back. The sight of water, clean, cool, plentiful, nearly broke his composure. He let his horse drink first, then filled his canteen before finally bringing the dipper to his own lips. The water tasted like life itself. When he turned, Violet stood closer than before, watching him with a curious expression. "You look half dead," she observed, not unkindly. "When's the last time you ate?" Jack wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Don't recall exactly. Yesterday, maybe." Something flickered across her face. Compassion, perhaps, though Jack had seen so little of it in his life that he scarcely recognized it. "I've got stew on. You're welcome to a bowl before you ride on." The offer hit Jack like an ambush. Kindness without strings attached wasn't something he encountered often. His instinct screamed to decline, to mount up and ride away before he became indebted. But his growling stomach betrayed him. "I can pay," he said stiffly, reaching for the meager coins in his pocket. Violet's eyes flashed with something like indignation. "I didn't offer it for sale. It's just stew. Besides," she added, glancing at his mare, "your horse could use the rest." As Jack followed her into the cabin, he couldn't shake the discomfort of entering someone else's domain. The interior was modest but meticulously maintained. An oak table with 4 chairs, a cast-iron stove, shelves with books that seemed wildly out of place in this remote corner of the territory. But most striking were the wildflowers arranged in simple jars throughout the room, splashes of color defying the harsh world outside. You live here alone? He asked, immediately regretting the personal question. I do now, Violet answered, stirring the pot on the stove. My father passed last winter. Pneumonia. I'm sorry, Jack offered awkwardly. She shrugged. That's the frontier. It takes more than it gives. There was resignation in her voice, but something else too. Determination, perhaps. As she ladled stew into a bowl, Jack noticed the calluses on her hands, the subtle strength in her movements. This wasn't a woman playing at frontier life. She was living it, surviving it. Most women would have sold up, headed back east. He observed as she placed the steaming bowl before him. Most women aren't me. Violet sat across from him with her own portion. This land is mine. I won't be chased off it by loneliness or hardship. They ate in silence, Jack savoring each bite of the rich venison stew. When finished, he pushed back from the table, the unfamiliar comfort making him restless. I should get moving. Still got daylight left. He reached again for his coins. Violet waved them away. Keep your money. All I ask is that if you pass through again, you might chop some wood or mend something that needs fixing. Fair exchange. The request, practical, straightforward, somehow calmed his unease. This wasn't charity. It was the frontier code of mutual aid. As Jack prepared to leave, dark clouds suddenly gathered on the horizon. A mountain storm, rolling in with frightening speed. You won't outride that, Violet observed from the doorway. Those storms come down from the mountains like avalanches. You're welcome to wait it out in the barn. Before Jack could protest, thunder cracked overhead and fat raindrops began pelting the ground. His mare whinnied nervously. Get your horse settled, Violet instructed. I'll bring out some dry blankets. And just like that, Jack Jenkins, who had spent a decade ensuring he never stayed in one place long enough to form attachments, found himself trapped by circumstance at the homestead of a woman who seemed to have no fear of the very isolation that had defined his existence. The storm raged through the night, winds howling around the sturdy barn where Jack had made a comfortable enough bed in the hayloft. He dozed fitfully, waking at each thunderclap, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. Old habits from too many nights in dangerous territories. Dawn broke with surprising clarity, the storm having washed the world clean. Jack emerged from the barn to find Violet already at work, assessing damage to her garden. Your roof lost some shingles, he called, noticing the gaps as he approached. She looked up, shading her eyes against the morning sun. Happens every storm. I'll get to it when I can. Jack shifted uncomfortably, feeling a strange obligation he couldn't name. I could fix it for you. Before I ride out. Surprise flashed across her face. You know how to repair roofs? Worked as a carpenter's apprentice in St. Louis before coming west, he admitted. Been a while, but some skills stick. That was how Jack Jenkins, drifter and deliberate loner, found himself spending the morning on Violet Blackburn's roof, hammering replacement shingles into place while she worked below in her damaged garden. The domesticity of it all made him profoundly uneasy, yet there was something undeniably satisfying about the work, something concrete and useful in a way that his aimless wandering rarely was. By midday, when the roof was mended and he'd helped salvage what vegetables could be saved from the garden, Jack knew he should leave. Every minute that passed formed another tenuous connection, another reason to worry about this solitary woman in her isolated homestead. Caring about others only gave the harsh frontier more weapons to use against you. I should get moving, he said as they shared a simple lunch of cold biscuits and jerky on the porch steps. Violet nodded, but then said, There's a creek about 2 miles west that's likely overflowing after that rain. Might want to avoid it. Take the northern trail instead. You know these lands well, Jack observed. Have to. Being alone out here means knowing every path, every creek, every potential danger. She met his eyes directly. Why are you drifting, Jack Jenkins? You're not running from the law? I can tell that much. The direct question caught him off guard. Just the way of things out here. Keep moving, stay ahead of trouble. Sounds lonely, she said simply. Safer that way, he countered. Violet studied him for a moment. Is it? My father always said a man alone in the wilderness is just waiting to become a cautionary tale. Her words struck uncomfortably close to truths Jack avoided examining. Before he could formulate a response, the distant sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. 3 riders approached from the east, moving with purposeful speed. Jack's instincts immediately tensed. Beside him, He felt Violet stiffen slightly. "Expecting visitors?" he asked quietly. "No," she replied, rising smoothly. "And that's Thaddeus Miller in the lead. He's been trying to buy this land since my father died." Jack stood too, casually adjusting his position so that his gun hand was free. "Just trying to buy? Or trying to take?" "So far, just persistent offers. But he's not the patient type." Her voice held no fear, only resignation and determination. The riders pulled up in front of the cabin, dust billowing around their horses. The man in front, Thaddeus Miller, was well-dressed for the frontier, his expensive duster and polished boots speaking of wealth unusual for these parts. "Miss Blackburn," Miller called, his voice carrying false cheer. "Thought I'd check you weren't washed away in that storm." His eyes shifted to Jack, narrowing slightly. "Didn't realize you had company." "Just passing through," Jack replied before Violet could speak. Something about the way Miller's companions surveyed the property set his nerves on edge. "Well now," Miller said, dismounting with exaggerated courtesy. "Miss Blackburn knows I'm always concerned about her welfare out here, all alone. These lands aren't meant for a woman without protection." Violet's posture straightened. "My father left me this land free and clear, Mr. Miller. And as I've told you repeatedly, it's not for sale." Miller's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Everything has a price, Miss Blackburn. And circumstances change. That storm damaged your crops, I see. Hard to make it through winter without a good harvest." The implied threat wasn't subtle. Jack recognized the tactic. Pressure until desperation forced capitulation. "Her roof's fixed and she's salvaged enough," Jack interjected, stepping slightly forward. "Seems to me Miss Blackburn manages just fine." Miller's false smile vanished. "Don't believe we've met, friend." "We haven't," Jack replied simply, holding the man's gaze. A tense silence stretched between them. Finally, Miller turned back to Violet. "My offer still stands. But prime grazing land like this won't stay unclaimed forever." Cattle baron from Wyoming's showing interest too. He mounted his horse with practiced ease. "Think on it, Miss Blackburn. Winter's coming, and it's a long, cold season to face alone." With that, Miller and his companions rode away. Jack watched them go, noting how they paused at the edge of the property, surveying it once more before disappearing over the ridge. "How long has that been going on?" he asked when they were out of sight. Violet's shoulders slumped slightly, the only sign that the encounter had affected her more than she'd shown. "Since 3 weeks after we buried my father. Started friendly enough. Lately less so." Jack frowned. "Man like that doesn't give up easy when he wants something." "I know." She turned to him, her blue eyes clear and direct. "But neither do I." In that moment, standing in her yard with the threat of Miller's return hanging over them, Jack felt something shift inside him, a recognition of courage that matched his own, but with purpose where he had only restlessness. "I should get going," he said, though the words felt hollow even to his own ears. Violet studied him for a moment. "Yes, I suppose you should. That's your way, isn't it? Keep moving, stay ahead of trouble." There was no judgment in her voice, only understanding. But as Jack prepared his mare, checking the saddle and securing his meager possessions, he found himself moving with unusual reluctance. The thought of riding away, leaving Violet alone to face Miller and his increasing pressure, sat uneasily in his chest. "I could stay another day," he found himself saying as he led his horse from the barn. "Your fence near the creek probably needs mending after that storm." Surprise and something like relief flickered across Violet's face. "It probably does," she agreed, the hint of a smile playing at her lips. "And I wouldn't turn down the help." One day became 2, then a week. Jack told himself each morning that he would leave the next day, once he finished whatever task he'd found to justify his continued presence. The garden needed tending. The barn door hinges needed oiling. The corral required reinforcement. Each night, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the vast Montana sky, Jack felt the walls he'd built around himself crumbling just a little more. Violet's quiet strength, her determination to hold on to what was hers despite the odds, awakened something he'd thought long dead: admiration, respect, and something more dangerous he refused to name. On the 8th night, as they shared coffee laced with a precious spoonful of sugar, Violet finally asked the question he'd been dreading. "What are you running from, Jack?" "Really?" He stared into his cup, watching the dark liquid swirl. "Not what?" "Who?" "Yourself?" she guessed softly. Jack looked up, startled by her perception. My father was a violent man. Quick temper, quick fists. Died in a brawl he started over nothing but wounded pride. The words came haltingly, truths he'd never shared. I've got his blood in me. Seen my own temper flare. Figure if I never stay put, never get close enough to hurt anyone who matters, I'm doing the world a favor. Violet was quiet for a long moment. My father had a temper too, she finally said. But he chose every day to master it, not let it master him. That's the difference between a good man and a bad one, Jack. Not the absence of darkness, but the choice to fight it. Her words penetrated defenses built over a decade of solitary wandering. For the first time, Jack allowed himself to consider that perhaps his father's legacy wasn't inevitable, that the blood in his veins didn't condemn him to the same lonely, violent end. Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of gunfire, followed by the orange glow of flames on the horizon, in the direction of the nearest neighboring homestead, nearly 5 miles away. The Hansons, Violet breathed, rising to her feet. Something's wrong. Jack was already moving, checking his gun. Stay here, or the door. Her hand on his arm stopped him. They have children, Jack. 3 of them. Her meaning was clear. This wasn't his fight, but innocent lives were at stake. 20 minutes later, they crested the ridge overlooking the Hanson homestead. The barn was fully engulfed in flames, illuminating the nightmarish scene below. 2 men, Miller's companions from before, were holding the Hanson family at gunpoint, while a third methodically doused the house with kerosene. This is what happens when people don't recognize a fair offer, one of the men was saying. Miller wanted to be civilized about this, but you folks just wouldn't listen. Jack assessed the situation with cold clarity. 3 armed men, the family on their knees, no cover for a direct approach. Circle around to the creek bed, he instructed Violet. Get to the family when I create a distraction. Get them to the root cellar if you can. Her face was pale but resolute in the firelight. What are you going to do? What I've spent 10 years avoiding, he replied grimly. Getting involved. The ensuing chaos unfolded in flashes of gunfire and desperate action. Jack's distraction, shooting the kerosene lantern from the third man's hand, created momentary confusion that allowed Violet to reach the family. When the shooting started in earnest, Jack found the calm precision that had saved his life in a dozen frontier confrontations. One of Miller's men went down with a bullet in his shoulder. Another fled into the darkness. The third, the one who'd been preparing to burn the house, managed to get off a shot that grazed Jack's side before Jack's return fire found its mark. By dawn, the barn was a smoldering ruin, but the Hanson family was safe. The wounded men were tied securely, awaiting the arrival of the territorial marshal who'd been summoned by a neighboring rancher. Miller won't stop, Mr. Hanson warned as Jack and Violet prepared to return to her homestead. He wants this whole valley. Says he's got investors back east waiting on the cattle operation he's planning. Then we'll be ready, Violet replied with quiet determination. The ride back was silent, both of them processing the night's violence and its implications. Jack's side throbbed where the bullet had grazed him, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the turmoil in his mind. He had done exactly what he'd sworn never to do. Put down roots, formed connections, made himself vulnerable to loss. When they reached Violet's homestead, he finally spoke the truth he'd been avoiding. I should leave. Miller will come looking for whoever interfered. If I'm gone, maybe he won't connect it to you. Violet dismounted and faced him, her expression fierce in the morning light. Is that really why you want to go? Or is it because you're afraid of caring about something enough that losing it would hurt? Her words hit with the precision of a well-placed bullet. Jack flinched visibly. People I care about tend to end up dead, he said harshly. My mother, my sister in that cholera outbreak, my friend Tom in Dodge City. And you think your absence would have changed any of that? Violet challenged. Death finds us all eventually, Jack. The question is whether we live before it does. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. Unlike the previous visit, this time Miller arrived with 6 men, all heavily armed. Thought I might find you here, Miller called to Jack, his face twisted with rage. My men recognize that distinctive dun mare of yours. He spat on the ground. Nobody interferes with my business. Jack dismounted slowly, positioning himself between Miller's men and Violet. Burning out families isn't business, he replied. It's murder. Miller's laugh was cold. It's progress, boy. This territory's changing. Small homesteaders like the Hansons, like Miss Blackburn here, they're just in the way of what's coming. This land is mine, Violet stated, moving to stand beside Jack rather than behind him. I have the deed, signed and registered. Deeds can be lost, Miller replied. Accidents happen, especially to women living alone in such dangerous country. Jack felt the familiar calm settling over him, the deadly focus that preceded violence. She's not alone. Miller studied him, then Violet, a slow, unpleasant smile spreading across his face. Well now, isn't this interesting? The drifters found something worth staying for. He nodded to his men. Take the woman. Kill him. What followed was a blur of gunfire and desperate struggle. Jack managed to drop 2 of Miller's men in the first exchange, but found himself pinned down behind the water trough as bullets splintered wood around him. He caught glimpses of Violet firing her rifle from the porch with surprising accuracy, forcing Miller's remaining men to seek cover. The turning point came when neighboring ranchers, alerted by the gunfire and already on edge after the attack on the Hansons, arrived with rifles and determined expressions. Miller's men, faced with unexpected opposition, broke and ran. Miller himself, caught in the open, took a bullet in the leg from Violet's rifle. By the time the territorial marshal arrived later that day, the story had spread throughout the valley. Miller's scheme to force out small landowners for his cattle operation was exposed, along with evidence of similar intimidation tactics used in Wyoming territory. The charges against him, attempted murder, arson, criminal conspiracy, ensured he wouldn't threaten anyone for a very long time. As the marshal and his deputies departed with their prisoners, the homesteaders gathered at Violet's place lingered, sharing food and the relief of danger past. You folks did this valley a service, old Mr. Peterson declared, raising his cup in a toast to Jack and Violet, standing together against those who take what isn't theirs. Jack, uncomfortable with the attention, slipped away to the quiet of the barn. The events of the past 24 hours had shattered the careful isolation he'd maintained for years. People knew his name now. They would remember his face. Most dangerous of all, they considered him one of their own. He was checking his mare, an old habit when preparing to leave, when Violet found him. Running again? She asked softly from the barn door. Jack's hands stilled on the saddle. It's what I do. Is it what you want to do? The simple question pierced through his defenses. Jack turned to face her, struck anew by her quiet strength and the intelligence in her blue eyes. I don't know how to stay, he admitted. I don't know how to build something that lasts. Violet crossed the barn to stand before him. Nobody does, until they try. She gestured toward the gathering outside. Those people out there, they're doing it every day, building something in a place that tries to break them. They fail sometimes. They lose crops and cattle, and sometimes people they love. But they keep building. And if I'm not built for it? Jack asked, voicing his deepest fear. If I'm made for drifting, like my father? Your father chose his path, Violet replied. You can choose differently. She took his hand, her touch sending an unexpected warmth through him. Stay, Jack. Not forever if you don't want to. Just stay long enough to see if you could want it. In her eyes, Jack saw something he'd been running from his entire adult life. Not just connection, but possibility. The chance to be more than his father's son, more than a drifter with a fast gun and no attachments. I might disappoint you, he warned. Violet smiled. I might disappoint you too. That's the risk we take. Outside, the gathering of neighbors continued, their voices and laughter carrying on the evening air, the sounds of community, of belonging. Jack felt the walls around his heart crumbling, not in defeat, but in liberation. One season, he offered finally. I'll stay through harvest. See if I'm any good at putting down roots. Autumn passed in a blur of shared labor and unexpected joy. Jack found himself adapting to the rhythms of settled life with surprising ease. The skills he'd acquired in years of drifting, hunting, tracking, repairing what was broken, proved valuable to both Violet's homestead and the neighboring properties. More surprising was how quickly he was accepted into the loose-knit community of the valley. You're good with your hands, Violet observed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and purple. The Petersons' new barn roof, the Hansons' repaired wagon, this porch swing. Jack smiled slightly. Never stayed in one place long enough to see my work endure before. And she nudged his shoulder gently. How does it feel? Good, he admitted. It feels good to build rather than just survive. As autumn gave way to the first snows of winter, Jack found himself no longer counting the days until his promised season ended. Instead, he and Violet worked together to prepare the homestead for the harsh Montana winter, chopping and stacking firewood, smoking meat, preserving the harvest from her garden. The first heavy snowfall trapped them indoors for 3 days. They passed the time with conversation that deepened with each passing hour. Jack shared stories of the places he'd seen in his years of wandering. The majesty of the Rockies, the vastness of the Dakota Plains, the chaotic energy of frontier towns. Violet told him of her childhood dreams, her father's determination to build something lasting, her refusal to abandon what they'd created together. On the third night, as they sat before the fire, Violet asked, "Do you still think about leaving when spring comes?" Jack considered the question honestly. "Less each day," he admitted. "Never thought I'd say this, but I'm starting to understand why men put down roots." Their first kiss came naturally, a culmination of shared danger, mutual respect, and growing affection. Jack pulled back first, his expression troubled. "I told you once that people I care about tend to end up dead," he said quietly. "I wasn't exaggerating, Violet. I've seen it happen too many times." She took his face between her hands. "And I told you that death finds us all eventually. The question is whether we truly live before it does." Her eyes held his, unwavering. "I would rather have a short life filled with love than a long one empty of it." That night, as the winter wind howled outside and snowflakes danced in the darkness, Jack Jenkins stopped running from the connection he'd feared all his adult life. In Violet's arms, he found not the vulnerability he dreaded but a strength he'd never known existed. The courage to love despite the certainty that all things, even the most precious, eventually end. Winter passed in a cocoon of deepening intimacy and shared purpose. They emerged in spring not as two separate individuals, but as partners in every sense. The homestead bore the marks of their combined vision: expanded gardens, repaired outbuildings, new furniture crafted by Jack's increasingly skilled hands. On a perfect spring morning, with wildflowers dotting the greening prairie, Jack took Violet to the rise overlooking the homestead. "I've been thinking about what comes next," he said, suddenly nervous in a way gunfights had never made him. "My season's long past." Violet's expression grew cautious. "Are you restless?" "That's just it," Jack replied, taking her hands in his. "I'm not. For the first time in my life, I don't feel the need to see what's over the next hill." He drew a deep breath. "I want to see what we can build here, together. Not just for a season or a year, but for a lifetime." Tears welled in Violet's eyes. "Are you asking me to marry you, Jack Jenkins?" He nodded, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "I came here almost a year ago asking for water. You offered me a chance at a life I never thought possible. A chance to be more than my father's son." He squeezed her hands gently. "I love you, Violet Blackburn. Will you marry me?" Her answer was a joyous yes that seemed to echo across the valley they now both called home. They married 2 weeks later in a ceremony attended by the entire community. Mr. Peterson, as the eldest landowner, performed the service on Violet's front porch, now their front porch. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing and more food than Jack had seen in one place since leaving civilization years before. As the last guests departed and twilight settled over their land, Jack and Violet stood together on the porch, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. "Having regrets?" she asked teasingly. Jack looked out over the homestead, the garden where shoots were already pushing through the soil, the corral where his mare now shared space with Violet's gelding, the new addition to the cabin they'd started building for the family they hoped to have. "Not one," he answered truthfully. "For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Violet smiled up at him. "Welcome home, Jack Jenkins." In that moment, with the woman he loved in his arms and the land they would nurture together spreading out before them, Jack finally understood what had eluded him in all his years of drifting. The frontier wasn't just a place of danger and isolation. It was also a place of possibility, where a man could remake himself, where connections weren't weaknesses but foundations, where love wasn't a luxury but the very thing that made survival meaningful. When Jack Jenkins had ridden onto Violet Blackburn's homestead asking for water, he'd been a man convinced that attachment meant vulnerability and vulnerability meant death. A year later, he understood the deeper truth. Without attachment, without love, he hadn't really been living at all. Together, they faced the setting sun, the vast Montana sky painted in impossible colors above them. Secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges the frontier might bring, they would face them as they had faced Miller and his men, side by side, stronger together than they could ever be apart.